"Please," the boy whispered, his voice a ragged thread in the sudden, suffocating silence of the diner. "Don't let him take me, please." Every head in the greasy spoon turned. The clatter of cutlery stopped. The low hum of conversation died. All that remained was the hiss of the grill and the relentless drumming of rain against the wide plate glass windows. The plea was not directed at the sheriff's deputy nursing a coffee at the counter. It was not directed at the burly truck driver who had been eyeing the boy with suspicion. It was directed at the man who looked like he was carved from granite and fury. The man with the silver-streaked beard and the patch on his leather vest that read, "Sons of Odin." It was directed at Stryker. Just an hour earlier, the world had been a different kind of loud. The rain had been a relentless assault against the thin fabric of Leo's jacket. He had walked for 2 days, fueled by stale crackers and a terror that gnawed at his insides. Every pair of headlights felt like a searchlight. Every distant siren felt like a death knell. He was just a boy, 16, but he looked younger, thinned out by fear and hunger. His face was a canvas of exhaustion, with a dark, ugly bruise blooming on his cheekbone, a gift from his supposed guardian. The diner, with its buzzing neon "open" sign, had been a beacon in the storm. He'd slipped inside, dripping and shivering, and slid into a booth in the far corner, trying to melt into the cracked vinyl. A waitress with a tired but kind face had brought him a coffee without him even asking, a silent act of grace he felt he didn't deserve. He had no money to pay for it. He could only nurse its warmth, hoping it would last until the rain stopped, or until he figured out what came next. Then they had arrived. The bell above the door had chimed, announcing them not with a cheerful jingle, but with a sound that felt like a toll. 5 of them. They filled the doorway, blocking the gray light, bringing the scent of wet leather and road grit and something else. Something dangerous. They were the sons of Odin. Even in this small, forgotten town, their reputation preceded them. They were outlaws, criminals, monsters that parents used to frighten their children. Their vests, or cuts, were adorned with patches that spoke of long miles and hard fights. The leader, Stryker, moved with an unnerving calm. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept the room once, assessing every person in it, dismissing them just as quickly. He was older than the others, his face a roadmap of a hard-lived life. Scars traced patterns on his knuckles and up his forearms. He didn't walk, he commanded the space he moved through. Behind him was a man so large he had to turn sideways to get through the door. His name was Bear, and he was aptly named. Then came Doc, leaner, with a haunted look in his eyes that spoke of things seen and not forgotten. Ghost was wiry, his fingers always twitching, his gaze constantly moving, taking in details others missed. And finally, Raven, the only woman, her black hair in a long braid, her expression as hard as any of the men's. They took the big round table in the center of the diner, as if it were a throne room. The other patrons shrank away. Conversations became whispers. The waitress approached them hesitantly, her notepad trembling in her hand. Stryker ordered for them all, black coffee 5 times. His voice was a low gravel, quiet, but carrying absolute authority. Leo had tried to make himself smaller, to slide further down in his seat. These were the very people he had been warned about his entire life. They were the predators, the wolves. Yet, as he watched them, he saw something else. He saw the way they moved together, a unit. He saw the way Stryker's gaze would occasionally soften when he spoke to Raven. He saw a strange sort of order in their chaos. He was still watching them when the bell chimed again. This time, the man who entered was the opposite of the bikers. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine despite the rain. His hair was perfectly coiffed. He was Mr. Gentry, a pillar of the community in a town 2 states over, a man who sat on charity boards and fostered troubled boys. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Mr. Gentry's eyes, cold and reptilian, scanned the diner and landed on Leo. A smile stretched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile of possession, of victory. "There you are, Leo," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, but to the boy it was the sound of a cage door slamming shut. "I was so worried. It's time to go home." Leo's blood ran cold. Home was not a place of warmth. It was a place of locked doors and quiet cruelties. It was the source of the bruise on his cheek and the fear in his soul. Mr. Gentry's hand clamped down on his arm, fingers digging into the muscle like talons. Panic, pure and blinding, seized Leo. He looked around wildly. The deputy at the counter was looking away, pointedly ignoring the family matter. The waitress looked pained but helpless. Everyone was afraid to interfere. Everyone was turning a blind eye. Everyone except the table in the center of the room. The bikers had stopped talking. They were watching, their expressions unreadable, but their attention absolute. In that moment, Leo made a choice. He didn't know why. It was instinct, a desperate gamble born of utter hopelessness. The man in the suit was a monster he knew. The men in leather were monsters he didn't. He chose the unknown. He ripped his arm from Mr. Gentry's grasp, the sudden movement so violent it tore the fabric of his thin shirt. He stumbled, half falling, across the few feet of worn linoleum that separated his booth from theirs. He reached out a trembling hand, not quite touching the leader's leather-clad arm. And that was when he spoke the words that changed everything. "Please, don't let him take me. Please." The world stopped. The silence was a physical weight. Mr. Gentry's face was a mask of cold fury. Stryker, the biker leader, didn't look at him. He didn't look at anyone but the terrified boy in front of him. Slowly, deliberately, Stryker pushed his chair back. The sound scraped loudly in the quiet room. He was a big man, and for a moment, Leo thought he was going to stand, to tower over him. Instead, he did the last thing Leo ever would have expected. He knelt. The big, scarred, terrifying biker knelt on the dirty diner floor, bringing himself down to eye level with the trembling boy. The leather of his pants creaked. His knees popped. He ignored it all. He looked into Leo's frightened eyes, and for the first time, Leo saw past the harsh exterior. He saw the winter sky eyes, and they weren't cold. They were assessing, but not judging. They were serious, but not cruel. "What's your name, son?" Stryker's voice was still gravel, but the edge was gone. It was soft, gentle. "Leo," the boy choked out. "Okay, Leo." Stryker gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You're okay now." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration, a promise. That promise was immediately challenged. Mr. Gentry strode forward, his expensive shoes clicking angrily on the floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This has nothing to do with you. This is a private family matter." Stryker didn't stand. He remained on one knee, his body a shield between Leo and the man in the suit. He finally turned his head, looking up at Mr. Gentry. "He doesn't look like family to you," Stryker said, his voice flat. "He looks like prey." Mr. Gentry's face tightened. "I am his legal guardian. He is a deeply troubled young man, prone to fantasies and running away. I am here to take him home, where he can get the help he needs." He reached for Leo's arm again. "Come along, Leo. You've made enough of a scene." Before his fingers could touch the boy, a hand shot out and clamped around his wrist. It was Bear. The giant enforcer hadn't moved from his seat, but his reach was long. His grip was casual, but it stopped Mr. Gentry's hand cold. "I wouldn't," Bear rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. Mr. Gentry tried to pull his hand away, but it was like being caught in a hydraulic press. A flicker of fear, quickly masked by outrage, crossed his face. "Let go of me. This is assault. I'll have you all arrested." "Go ahead," Stryker said, still looking up at him. "Call the sheriff. He's right over there." He gestured with his head toward the deputy, who was now watching with wide, alarmed eyes, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Tell him your story. Then I'll tell him mine." Stryker finally rose to his feet. He wasn't as tall as Bear, but he had a presence that seemed to suck the air out of the room. He stood beside Leo, placing a heavy, steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. The message was unmistakable. The boy was with them now. "He's a minor under my care," Mr. Gentry hissed, his composure beginning to fray. "You have no right to interfere." "The boy asked for help," Stryker replied, his voice dangerously calm. "My club has a rule. We don't turn our backs on kids who ask for help. Ever." He looked at his brothers, Bear, Doc, Ghost, Raven. They all met his gaze with silent, unwavering agreement. This was their code. It was more sacred than any law written in a book. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Gentry scoffed, trying to regain control. "You're a bunch of thugs. The law will not side with you." "Maybe," Stryker conceded. "But right now, we're not talking about the law. We're talking about what's right." He looked down at Leo. "You want to go with this man?" Leo shook his head violently, shrinking closer to Stryker's leg. The fear radiating from him was palpable. It was an animal terror that no child should ever have to feel. "There's your answer," Stryker said, turning his cold eyes back to Mr. Gentry. "He's not going anywhere with you." The standoff was set. On one side, a man of wealth and supposed respectability, armed with the authority of the system. On the other, a group of leather-clad outcasts, armed with nothing but their own unbreakable code. And in the middle, a terrified boy who had gambled his life on the mercy of monsters. Mr. Gentry finally wrenched his wrist free from Bear's grip, rubbing the red marks. He was breathing heavily, his mask of civility cracking with every passing second. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled. "I am a respected member of my community. I have connections. You will regret this." Stryker didn't flinch. Threats don't work on men who have nothing left to lose. He gave a slight nod to Ghost. "Ghost, get the plate number from his car, the silver sedan." Ghost was already moving. He slipped out of his seat and melted toward the front window, his movements quiet and efficient. He was back in 30 seconds, murmuring a string of letters and numbers into Stryker's ear. "Good," Stryker said. He pulled out an old beat-up flip phone. It was a relic, a burner, untraceable. He handed it to Ghost. "See what you can find. Be quick." Ghost nodded, his fingers already flying over the tiny keypad. He wasn't just a biker. He had been a signals intelligence analyst in the Army. He knew his way around the dark corners of the internet, places where secrets went to hide but never truly died. Mr. Gentry watched this exchange with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. "What do you think you're doing? You can't possibly—" "We're doing our due diligence," Stryker cut him off. He turned to Doc. "Doc, take a look at the kid." Doc, who had been a combat medic, moved with a practiced gentleness. He knelt beside Leo, his voice low and soothing. "Hey there, Leo. I'm Doc. Can I just check that bruise on your face? Make sure nothing's broken." Leo hesitated for a second, then gave a tiny nod. Doc's fingers were surprisingly gentle as they probed the tender skin around his eye. "This is a few days old," Doc said, his voice quiet but carrying in the silent diner. "Nasty one. Did you fall?" Leo shook his head, his eyes flicking nervously toward Mr. Gentry. "He's clumsy," Mr. Gentry snapped. "Always has been." "Right," Doc said, his tone laced with disbelief. He gently lifted the torn sleeve of Leo's shirt. There were older bruises on his arm, faded yellow and green, in the distinct shape of fingers. "Looks like he falls a lot." Every person in the diner saw it. The deputy saw it. The waitress saw it. The illusion of the caring guardian was beginning to crumble, replaced by a much uglier reality. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The fear of the bikers began to curdle into suspicion of the man in the suit. Stryker stood like a statue, his hand never leaving Leo's shoulder. The weight of it was grounding, a promise of protection that felt more real than anything Leo had ever known. He could feel the warmth of it through his thin shirt, a barrier against the cold fear that had been his constant companion. Raven got up from the table. She went to the counter and spoke quietly to the waitress. A moment later, she returned with a glass of milk and a steaming plate of pancakes, which she set down in the booth behind Leo. She didn't say a word to him, just gave a slight nod, an unspoken invitation. Food, safety, sanctuary. This was their way. They didn't make grand speeches. They acted. Each member had a role, a purpose. Bear was the shield. Doc was the healer. Raven was the nurturer. Ghost was the weapon. And Stryker. Stryker was the heart, the moral compass that guided them all. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Ghost sat hunched over the phone, his face illuminated by its pale blue light. Mr. Gentry paced back and forth like a caged animal, his arrogance warring with a rising panic. He kept glancing at the deputy, expecting him to intervene, to restore the proper order of things where a man of his standing was believed over a group of motorcycle-riding degenerates. But the deputy stayed put, his expression troubled. He had seen the bruises. He had heard the terror in the boy's voice. He was a small-town cop, but he wasn't a fool. Finally, Ghost looked up. He met Stryker's eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. He had found it. He had found the truth. Ghost didn't speak. He simply stood and walked over to Stryker, handing him the small phone. Stryker took it, his eyes scanning the screen. His expression, already grim, hardened into something terrifying. It was the look of a judge who had just read the evidence and was about to pass sentence. He took a step toward Mr. Gentry, holding the phone out. The screen showed a social media memorial page. A picture of a smiling, dark-haired boy. "You recognize him?" Stryker's voice was ice. Mr. Gentry squinted at the phone, his face a mask of confusion. I have no idea who that is." "Don't you?" Stryker's voice dropped even lower. His name was Toby. He was another troubled boy. From a group home in Millersburg. He went home with you 6 months ago. He was never seen again. The blood drained from Mr. Gentry's face. He looked like he had been punched in the gut.
That's a lie. I don't know what you're talking about."
Ghost is very good at what he does, Stryker continued, relentless. He found this memorial page, but he also found the original profile, the one that was deleted, the one where Toby posted pictures of your house. He also found the messages Toby sent to his friend, coded messages, about being scared, about being locked in, about a man who was kind in public and a monster in private. Stryker took another step closer, backing Mr. Gentry up against a table. And then Ghost found another one, a boy named Sam, from 2 years ago, same story. A difficult foster child, a caring guardian. The boy vanished. The case went cold. "You're insane," Mr. Gentry stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is slander. You can't prove any of this." "I don't have to," Stryker said, his voice a low growl. "But you know it's true, and Leo knows it's true." He pointed the phone at Mr. Gentry's chest, and now, so does everyone else in this room. The mask was gone. The respectable facade had been shattered, blown away by the quiet work of a man with a burner phone and a particular set of skills. What was left was ugly and raw. It was the face of a predator, cornered and exposed. Mr. Gentry's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. He saw no allies. The diner patrons were staring at him with open disgust. The waitress held a heavy coffee pot like a weapon. The deputy was slowly, deliberately unsnapping the holster of his sidearm. His composure broke completely. Rage and fear twisted his features into a grotesque snarl. "You have no right," he shrieked, his voice high and shrill. "He's mine. I'm responsible for him." He lunged. It wasn't a lunge at Stryker. It was a lunge at Leo. A desperate, last-ditch attempt to grab his property and flee. He never made it. Bear moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He stepped in front of Leo, a mountain of leather and muscle. Mr. Gentry crashed into him like a wave breaking against a cliff. He bounced off, stumbling backward. "Bad choice," Bear rumbled. "A very bad choice." Mr. Gentry scrambled for the door, his dignity forgotten, his only thought to escape. But Raven was there, blocking his path. She didn't try to stop him physically. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes filled with a cold, righteous fury. He skidded to a halt, then tried to dodge around her. That's when the deputy finally acted. "Police, freeze!" he yelled, his voice cracking with adrenaline, but firm with resolve. His weapon was drawn now, pointed squarely at Mr. Gentry's chest. The arrival of more official help was almost an afterthought. 2 squad cars, lights flashing silently in the rain-streaked twilight, pulled up outside. The deputy must have called for backup when he saw things escalating. 2 more officers entered, their hands on their weapons, taking in the bizarre scene. The terrified boy, the well-dressed man held at gunpoint, and the 5 silent bikers who stood like guardians around them all. The defeat of Mr. Gentry was not a loud, violent affair. It was quiet and absolute. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He simply deflated. the evil within him exposed for all to see. The officers cuffed him, reading him his rights in a flat monotone that echoed in the stunned silence of the diner. As they led him away, a pathetic, trembling figure, his eyes met Stryker's one last time. There was no defiance in them, only hatred and the bitter shock of being outmaneuvered, of having his respectable world torn down by the very people he despised and underestimated. Stryker watched him go, his expression unreadable. He had not laid a hand on the man. He had not broken a single law. He had simply held his ground, spoken the truth, and allowed the man's own wickedness to be his undoing. Justice was served. The tension in the diner broke. People started talking again, in hushed, excited tones. They looked at the bikers differently now. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange mixture of awe and gratitude. These weren't monsters. They were protectors. The deputy holstered his weapon and approached Stryker, his face still pale. We're going to need a statement, from you and from the boy. You'll get it, Stryker said. But first, the kid eats, and he needs a warm, dry place to sleep. He looked down at Leo, who was staring, wide-eyed, at the empty doorway where Mr. Gentry had disappeared. The boy was trembling, not from cold, but from the aftershock of the confrontation. Stryker's hand was still on his shoulder. "It's over, Leo," he said, his voice gentle again. "He can't hurt you anymore." Leo looked up at him, his eyes swimming with tears he had refused to shed in front of his tormentor. And for the first time since he had run away, he felt a single, fragile flicker of hope. He had run to the monsters for help, and the monsters had saved him. The aftermath was a flurry of quiet, efficient activity. While Stryker gave a concise and factual statement to the deputy, the rest of the club created a circle of protection around Leo. They moved him to the booth Raven had prepared, shielding him from the curious stares of the other patrons. Doc sat with him, speaking in a low, calm voice, not asking questions about what happened, but simply being present. He checked Leo's pulse, made sure he wasn't in shock. "Deep breaths, kid, in and out. That's it. You did good. You were brave." Brave. No one had ever called Leo brave. He had only ever felt afraid. But hearing it from the man with the haunted eyes made it feel real. He focused on the plate of pancakes in front of him. He was starving, but his stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. Raven sat across from him. She pushed the syrup dispenser toward him. "Eat," she said. It wasn't a command, but a firm, maternal encouragement. "You need your strength." She poured milk into his glass, the simple gesture an act of profound care. Leo picked up the fork. His hand was shaking. He managed a small bite of pancake. It was warm and sweet, and it felt like the most wonderful thing he had ever tasted. He took another bite, then another. He ate until the plate was clean, and the knot in his stomach slowly began to loosen. Bear stood by the entrance of the diner, his arms crossed. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was a sentinel, a clear and present sign that this space was now under their protection. No one else was coming in. No one was getting near the boy. When Stryker finished with the police, he came back to the table. The deputy had assured him that Mr. Gentry was being transported back to his home state, where detectives were already securing a warrant for his house based on Ghost's information and Leo's preliminary testimony. The system was moving. The wheels of justice, for once, were turning in the right direction. "All right, kid," Stryker said, sitting down next to Leo. "We've got a place you can stay. It's warm, it's dry, and it's safe. No one will find you there. You with us?" Leo looked at the faces around him, the giant, silent guard, the gentle medic, the tough, caring woman, the quiet, watchful tech, and the leader, the man who had knelt on a dirty floor for him. They were a pack, a family. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Good." Stryker stood up. He threw a $100 bill on the counter, more than enough to cover their coffees and Leo's meal, and to thank the kind waitress for her silence and her support. "Let's ride." They led Leo out of the diner into the now abating rain. The townsfolk who had been inside watched them go, their perceptions irrevocably altered. They had witnessed not a crime, but a rescue. They had seen the true nature of the Sons of Odin. The clubhouse was not what Leo had imagined. He had pictured a dirty, chaotic bar filled with smoke and loud music. Instead, it was a large, converted warehouse on the edge of town, and it was meticulously organized. Motorcycles were parked in neat rows, gleaming under the overhead lights. A workshop area was spotless, tools hanging on pegboards in perfect order. The living area was communal and surprisingly comfortable. There were worn leather couches, a large wooden table, and a massive stone fireplace where a fire was already crackling merrily. It felt less like a den of outlaws and more like a fortress, a barracks built on brotherhood. Raven led Leo to a small, clean room in the back. It had a simple cot, a dresser, and a small window. "This is yours for as long as you need it," she said, handing him a stack of folded clothes. They were old club t-shirts and soft sweatpants. "There's a shower down the hall. Get cleaned up. We'll have some real food for you when you're done." Leo stood in the shower for a long time, letting the hot water wash away the grime of the road and the lingering chill of his fear. He washed away the phantom touch of Mr. Gentry's hands. When he emerged, wrapped in a towel, he looked at his reflection in the steamy mirror. The bruise was still there, dark and angry, but his eyes looked different. The frantic, hunted look was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. And something else, something he hadn't seen in a long time, a glimmer of peace. When he came out to the main room, dressed in the clean, soft clothes, the smell of stew filled the air. The 5 bikers were sitting around the large table. They had saved a spot for him, right next to Stryker. He sat down hesitantly. For a while, they ate in silence. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a comfortable one. The kind of silence that exists between people who don't need words to understand each other. The stew was rich and hot, filled with meat and potatoes, and it warmed Leo from the inside out. After dinner, Stryker finally spoke. He leaned back in his chair, nursing a mug of coffee. "You're probably wondering why," he said, his voice low. "Why a bunch of guys like us would stick our necks out for a kid we don't know." Leo just nodded, looking down at his empty bowl. "We have a code," Stryker explained. "It's not written down anywhere, but it's the most important thing we have. We protect our own, and we protect women and children, no exceptions." He paused, his gaze distant. "Most of us, we didn't have anyone to do that for us when we were young. We were the throwaway kids, the ones nobody wanted, the ones people turned a blind eye to." He looked around the table at his brothers and sister. Doc, whose father had been a violent drunk. Bear, who had been abandoned in foster care. Raven, who had run from an abusive husband. Ghost, the awkward genius who was bullied relentlessly until he joined the army. And Stryker himself, who had come home from a war overseas to find his family gone and his world shattered. "We were all you once," Stryker said, his eyes locking with Leo's. "Lost, scared, alone. This club, the Sons of Odin, we found each other. We built our own family, a family that doesn't run, a family that fights back." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "That man, Gentry, he preys on the vulnerable because he thinks no one will stand up for them. He thinks the world doesn't care about kids like you. He's wrong. We care." Leo felt the tears he had been holding back finally spill over. They weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of finally being seen. He quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. Bear, the silent giant, reached across the table and pushed the box of tissues toward him. He didn't say a word, but his eyes were surprisingly gentle. "You're safe here, Leo," Raven said softly. "This is a safe house. You can stay as long as you need. No one will ask you to leave. No one will ever lay a hand on you here." That night, Leo lay in the small, clean cot, listening to the muffled sounds of the clubhouse. The low murmur of voices, the clink of a bottle, the occasional burst of rough laughter. They were the sounds of a family, his family. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he fell asleep without fear. He fell asleep feeling protected. He fell asleep feeling home. The club didn't just give him a bed, they gave him a life. In the days that followed, they formally took him in. Stryker, using a network of contacts Leo couldn't begin to fathom, arranged for a lawyer, a pro bono bulldog of a man who specialized in juvenile cases. They started the process of legally emancipating Leo from Mr. Gentry's custody, a process made infinitely easier by the mountain of evidence the police were now uncovering at the man's pristine suburban home. Leo was given chores around the clubhouse, sweeping the workshop, helping Doc restock medical supplies, polishing chrome until it gleamed. It wasn't forced labor, it was a way of giving him purpose, of making him feel like a contributing member of the household. Bear, in his quiet way, started showing him how to work on the bikes. He taught him the difference between a wrench and a ratchet, how to change the oil, how to listen to an engine and understand what it was telling him. Ghost, the tech wizard, found out about Leo's interest in computers. He set up an old laptop for him and began teaching him the basics of coding, of navigating the digital world not as a victim, but as a creator. Raven helped him enroll in online classes so he wouldn't fall behind in school. She checked his homework, quizzed him on his history lessons, and read his essays, offering gentle corrections and unwavering encouragement. They were rebuilding him piece by piece. They were filling in the cracks that fear and neglect had carved into his soul. They didn't coddle him. They were rough around the edges, their language was coarse, and their manners were non-existent. But their care was absolute. Their protection was unconditional. One afternoon, Stryker found Leo sitting by the fireplace, sketching in a notepad Ghost had given him. He was drawing the clubhouse, the bikes, the faces of the people who had saved him. Stryker sat down next to him. "The lawyer called," he said. "It's done. Gentry took a plea deal. He's not going to see the outside of a prison cell for a very, very long time. They found evidence connecting him to Toby's disappearance and to others. You saved more than just yourself, kid. You saved the ones who might have come after." Leo looked up from his drawing, his expression solemn. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "for everything." "You don't have to thank us," Stryker said. "You're family. We look after family." He looked at the drawing in Leo's lap. It was a crude but powerful image of a large bearded biker holding the hand of a small thin boy, standing between him and a shadowy figure. "You're getting good at that." Leo smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Bear's been showing me how to see the lines in things." Stryker clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture full of pride. "Good. Keep at it." He wasn't just a runaway anymore. He wasn't a victim. He was Leo, a prospect of the Sons of Odin, not a biker in training, but a young man under the fierce, unwavering protection of the club. He had a home. He had a future. He had a family, forged not by blood, but by a code of honor in a greasy spoon diner on a rainy afternoon. He was one of them. 5 years passed. The boy who had stumbled, terrified and starving, into a roadside diner was gone. In his place stood a young man of 21, tall and confident, with eyes that were clear and steady. Leo was in his final year of college, majoring in social work. He carried himself with a quiet strength that was a mirror of the man who had knelt for him all those years ago. He never became a patched member of the Sons of Odin. That was never the goal. But he was, and always would be, family. He spent his weekends and holidays at the clubhouse, which had changed just as much as he had. The club's reputation in the community had undergone a seismic shift. The story of what happened in the diner had spread, becoming something of a local legend. The incident at the Crossroads Cafe, people called it. At first, it was whispered in tones of shock and disbelief. But as time went on, the whispers changed to respect and then to admiration. The Sons of Odin were still intimidating. They still rode loud bikes and wore worn leather. But people didn't shrink away from them anymore. They nodded. They waved. They knew what the patches and the scars really stood for, a line in the sand, a promise to protect the helpless. The clubhouse itself had become an unofficial sanctuary. It started small, a woman fleeing a violent partner, remembering the story and showing up on their doorstep in the middle of the night. The club took her in, gave her a safe room, and Bear and a few others parked their bikes outside her ex-partner's house for 3 days straight. A silent, terrifying message that he was being watched. He never bothered her again. Then it was a teenager kicked out of his home with nowhere to go. Ghost found him a spot in a youth shelter in another city, and Stryker gave him the bus fare and a $100 bill. "Call us if you need anything," he'd said. Anything at all. The club's mission hadn't changed. It had just been revealed to the world. They were still outlaws in the eyes of some, but to the lost and the broken, they were guardians. They were the last resort, the court of final appeal when the system failed. Leo was a huge part of this transformation. With his training in social work, he helped formalize their outreach. He built a network of contacts with shelters, legal aid societies, and counselors. He became the bridge between the club's raw, protective instinct and the official channels of help. He translated the needs of the desperate into action items for the bikers. One crisp autumn evening, Leo was at the clubhouse, helping Doc organize a massive donation of canned goods they had collected for the local food bank. The main room was warm, filled with the comfortable camaraderie of the club. Stryker was in his usual chair by the fire, cleaning a piece of his motorcycle with a soft cloth. Above the mantelpiece, in a simple black frame, hung a crayon drawing. It was the one Leo had made all those years ago. The big bearded biker holding a small boy's hand, shielding him from a dark shadow. It was the club's most prized possession, a constant reminder of their purpose. Leo walked over and stood by the fireplace, watching the flames dance. "You know," he said, "I was thinking about Mr. Gentry today." Stryker looked up, his expression calm. "What about him?" "I was reading about his final sentencing for class, the lives he ruined. Toby, Sam, the others they found. I used to hate him so much it felt like it would burn me up from the inside." Leo paused, looking into the fire. "But I don't feel that anymore. I just pity him. He was so powerful, but he was the weakest man I've ever met." "Fear and cruelty are the weapons of the weak," Stryker said, his voice a low rumble. "Real strength is what you do for others, not what you do to them. It took me a long time to learn that." "You didn't just save me, Stryker," Leo said, turning to face him. "You showed me how to be strong. All of you did." Before Stryker could reply, the phone in the clubhouse, a dedicated line they had set up for people in need, began to ring. Raven answered it, her voice calm and professional. She listened for a moment, her face growing serious. She held the phone out to Stryker. "It's a woman from a town over. Her daughter, teenager, didn't come home from school. She thinks the girl's boyfriend has her, and he's bad news. The police said they can't do anything for 24 hours. Stryker's eyes met Leo's. It was the same story, just a different chapter. A vulnerable child, a failing system, a desperate parent calling for the monsters in the dark. Stryker pushed himself to his feet, the soft cloth falling from his lap. He looked around the room at his club. At Bear, already standing, his jaw set. At Doc, packing a small medical kit. At Ghost, grabbing a laptop. At Raven, writing down the address. At Leo, whose face was filled not with fear for the past, but with resolve for the future. The legacy of that rainy day was not just one boy's salvation. It was a beacon that now shone for others. It was a cycle of protection paid forward. Stryker grabbed his leather cut from the hook by the door, shrugging it on. The weight was familiar, comforting. It was his armor. It was his uniform. He looked at his family, the one he had built from broken pieces. "Let's ride," he said. And together they walked out into the night, the engines of their motorcycles roaring to life, a thunderous promise to a world that still had shadows, and to the people who needed someone to stand with them against the dark.